Coder.
Quizzical mind, somebody that likes to solve puzzles.
Someone who can work within a team.
I think you have to be quite meticulous.
You have to persevere.
Intelligent enough to understand the logic of the code.
Have empathy for their users.
The first thing is patience.
Likes to solve riddles.
A good coder is someone who can think through clearly and implement their idea into code.
10 years ago, we were coding for computers, but now everything is a computer.
A lot of the redundant and rudimentary stuff we do as a developer will be taken over by these automated processes.
Things like human-brain interfaces and machine learning and neural networks.
Potentially a new language that doesn't even exist yet.
I still believe we have a bright future, despite self-driving cars and artificial intelligence.
Interacting with a keyboard-less layout.
I think we're going to see a lot more voice interaction with devices.
Hopefully not computers coding themselves. This would be like, how it's called, the singularity, right?
I code because I love coding.
I code because I love, for me, it's like a brain puzzle.
Because I'm a builder and I ran out of Lego bricks.
There's a lot of creative juices that flow when I write code.
Because I like making things, basically.
Coding is fun.
It's a fascinating, wide-open field where you can do anything you absolutely want to do.
Having a problem that you turn into a solution through code is one of the most beautiful things in a job that I can imagine doing.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to Oracle Code Singapore. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Rex Wang. I'm the Vice President in charge of the Developer Initiative, a member of the Content Committee for Oracle Code. So I want to thank you so much for coming today. It's great to see everyone in the room. We have a great agenda, a lot of great content, very technical, very educational. We have a number of hands-on labs as well, a number of exhibits out in the Developer Lounge. And we're going to cover all these things for the rest of today. I need the clicker here. Let me try this. So the topics for today are some of the more cutting-edge topics in the application development space. We're going to focus on machine learning and artificial intelligence, leveraging containers, Docker containers, Kubernetes, microservices, and serverless. We're going to look at chatbots as a new paradigm for interaction with customers and with employees. Blockchain is a very important technology, and we have an offering there that we want to share with you as well. We'll of course cover databases and data management. We'll cover various programming languages, including Java and JavaScript. We'll cover DevOps and a number of tools as well. So we look forward to sharing this information with you today. With no further ado, I have one more slide to show. So please download the Oracle Events application. You can get it from the Apple Store or the Google Play, and you can follow along. There's a full schedule and agenda in there. That's the best way to know where you're going next. Okay? So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Oracle Regional Managing Director for ASEAN, Cherian Varghese.
Thank you.
It's a great honor for you to be here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, good morning, Singapore. Are you awake? Are you awake? You are, right? Thank you so very much for coming here. It's such a pleasure for me to welcome each one of you by your organization, by your name. And it's such a great privilege that all of you could make time on a good day. I'm sure you have taken sacrifices from your work. Some of you are here for fun. Some of you are for learning. I hope it's a great and productive day today. When you go back home, I hope your brain knowledge would have swelled a little bit, okay? You live the fun, you get excited, and you use all the knowledge what you learned today to right use. I also want to say that amongst us, there are plenty of folks across the globe, or probably across ASEAN, who are joining in over through a webcast. So I want to welcome all the team members and all the developers, coders across ASEAN and SAGE region, a warm welcome. We all are here for one single passion, and the passion for coding. What's so beautiful about this event? It's happening in a wonderful country called Singapore. Absolutely vibrant. So some of you would have seen, if you are, I think a week back, the government set up an initiative called as Building the Local Talent. And what better way to form a co-relationship between building talent in Singapore and having one of the code events in this country. I think it's a great marriage. Everybody here in this room are wonderful coders, and you are at the cusp of making history with the coding initiative. So a warm welcome to each one of you. Okay, so from an event perspective, this is our 32nd or 33rd. We have done 32 events till now across the globe. You've seen all those dots. Oracle is now the largest open source company, and really we are glad to support the big cloud platform we are doing and running through various initiatives. Our belief in this code program comes from 4 key important points. First one, we are an open-based platform. We are modern, we are easy and intelligent. So these 4 are fundamentals of this code program, and I really want to remember this event for 4 easy things: open, modern, easy, and intelligent. I think it's always important, as from a leadership perspective, if the message is coming from top. For those who know, the president's office himself posted a Sudoku source code. And what a brilliant way to say, we all live for the code. Truly, I think the speed and the agility required in today's world is really I think it's a challenge for each one of us. What coding you did yesterday may get outdated in a few days, in a few months. So I think being the speed and the agility with which you are going to respond to the market, the speed and the agility with which you are going to respond to your customers becomes the core important challenge as this coder or the developer community. I think it's just an excitement period for each one of you, the kick what you get. You would have seen the video which ran. Some people said, we live for the code. It's fun, it's exciting, it's learning new. But I think the most important message as coders or developers in this room would be how relevant I am. How fast do I adapt to changes? How fast and equipped am I being able to change what is happening with the industry with time? I think that for me is the single biggest challenge for each one of you in the room. How do I stay relevant? I think at the end of the day, today when you leave this room, I think with the amount of workshops put together, the amount of networking you will have together will stand the platform to build a good course program going forward. Excited about it and looking forward for each one of you. As a country, I think Singapore has really made strides in every single innovations which are happening. I think most of you are privy towards it. And Oracle has truly partnered in various forms. One of the key partnerships what we have done is through Oracle Academy. 2.5 million students and 106 countries we have managed to work with them. And a whooping amount of $3.3 billion have been spent on the student community. So as Oracle, we really mean it's important for us. It is important for us to help groom this community and build that big talent force. A very important initiative we started last year. It was called as the Oracle Startup Accelerator. So what are we doing? It's something which is very close to my heart. We are grooming a set of few wonderful companies who are actually startups. We are able to mentor them, share some of the technologies with them, and then take them to the market. One such company is very much in our midst. The name of the company is Unscramble, and it is going to present in the breakout today. Take time to talk to them about what they do. A wonderful initiative, moving with great speed, and surely will make a mark, so watch out for this great company. Last but not the least, we are very much partnered with NTUC Learning Hub, and that for us is a commitment as the leader of Oracle in this region. We are competing with some of the biggest names, yet we are sure that we will be able to give all the kind of support to NTUC in its learning skills to ensure we have a great skilled pool. And this actually relates back to what the Prime Minister said about building a talent-based economy, building a huge talent pool for Singapore, and I think we're in line with that thought. So, without much ado, I just want to say a big thank you to all of you. Thank you for joining us here. I look forward so that you have a wonderful and productive day, something which you will be proud about. You go back and take this knowledge back. Most importantly, such a wonderful group of people in this room, network. Networking is a key skill in the developer community. Who knows, you might just get a wonderful venture capitalist in the same group. You might get somebody who might take you to the next level. So network hard, learn hard, and most importantly, swell your knowledge with living with the code. I want to invite our next speaker, Aaron Adjeri. He's the CEO of Riot Secure, and it's a great privilege that he's here to share his company, his knowledge, and a warm welcome to Aaron at this point of time. Thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you. Well, guys, it's been a couple of years since I've been in Singapore, but thankfully I have been here before. I know the photo is a little outdated, but still look the same. All right, so today I'm going to give you kind of like a bit of inspiration. Originally, I met with the team of Oracle in JFocus in Stockholm, and they asked me, can you do a luminary keynote? I'm like, what the hell is a luminary? You know, it's like, I had to look it up, right? So basically, I'm here to inspire you. I mean, we had great words previously talking about the fact you need to do networking and, you know, do what you believe in and try and, you know, do the most of what you can. So I had to look this up, and I thought, well, how the hell am I going to fit 30 years of experience? Because I've been developing for 30 years. So I started, and my girlfriend can confirm this, I had these Post-it notes sitting on my pool table. I'm like, wow, all this knowledge, you know, how am I going to fit this in 45 minutes? I mean, I can sit here all day and talk to you guys for hours, right? So by all means, if you want to network with me and ask me questions after the keynote, you're more than welcome. So I just wrote down all these ideas, and, you know, I did a keynote in Shenzhen, and I did more of a historical thing, but I thought it was a bit too much for you guys. And like I said, fitting 30 years in 45 minutes was pretty hard. So this time I keep it simple. This is who I am. Believe it or not, actually, you guys are here for Oracle, and of course, the majority of you guys are probably here for Java. I actually was a Java guy well back in the day, so there's me holding the Java language specification, which is actually a document I picked up in 1995. So I've done Java teaching at university. I've also done a bit of mobile game development. I've done professionally, like full-time job stuff, working with enterprise architecture and mobile device management. But more importantly, the last couple of years before I kind of early retirement, is I did a lot of developer evangelism and developer outreach, right? So I got bored, so this is why I'm here, right? You know, you can only be retired for so long and have so many beers on the beach before you get bored. So this was brought up before with the introduction. You know, why are we developers, right? So I mean, of course, I think most of these were mentioned in the pre-video. You know, we solve problems. We like to create solutions. We identify patterns, and, you know, we connect all the dots to put all the pieces together. But I think the most important thing that kind of was a message is that we enjoy what we do, right? So Confucius, I guess Confucius said this, you know, if you do what you love, right, you never work another day in your life, right? So that's kind of true for me. A lot of my friends are saying, oh, I have to go to work. And I'm like, dude, this is what I do, right? I love this. I love developing, right? I still write code even to the day, even though I run my own company. So key thing is that every developer is different. How many of you guys have actually tuned into Silicon Valley? Right? You watched the HBO series? Man, you guys are missing out. Because I think this is the perfect environment to describe this is how startups work. This is like the notion of, you know, the conflict between developers. I mean, you guys have probably definitely heard about Holy Wars. How many of you guys are VI guys or Emacs, and you guys have that debate at the water fountain, right? So just to get all the questions out of the way, this is my preference, right? I'm a space guy, not a tab guy, so if you guys want to be religious about that, right, you don't have to talk to me after this. But of course, you know, I'm a VI guy. I prefer agile development versus waterfall. Love my Mac, but I can't stand the iPhone, right? So, I mean, everyone's different, and I think this is what makes us unique in the characters, right? But at the same time, it brings us to the next question of, you know, are we a startup guy or are we corporate guys, right? So there's a bit of a difference between the two environments, right? So either you're, you know, in the startup life where you say, look, I'm going to make rich, or you're just going to say, oh, I'll wear the suit and tie to work and join the corporate life. And I found a nice quote by Dave McClure that said, a startup is basically a company that's confused about, number one, what their product is, right? Number two, who their customers are, and third of all, which is probably the most important, is how to make money, right? So what we see is there was a nice summary by Jeffrey Moore, who is a marketing genius, who wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm. And this is his adoption curve as he defines it. So what you have on the left is like the innovators and the early adopters, and then of course you have the early majority, late majority, and the laggards, as he calls them. But you have this distinct gap between those early adopters and early majority. And he terms this called crossing the chasm, right? So typically on the left is your startups, and they're typically funded by VC, or they have some form of seed funding. And you know, they kind of say, oh, we've got some great ideas, and they get the money and go nuts. But it really takes a different mindset of having a company as an early adopter to make that switch to the early majority. And what it comes down to is that you can't be a startup the whole life, right? And it normally turns into the fact that by crossing the chasm, it's just an absolute goal for most companies. It's actually a change of mindset, right? So instead of being oh, this is a great idea, this is a great topic, you actually have to focus on sales, marketing, you know, how to make money, etc. Right? So going back to the startup versus corporate, there are some different attitudes, right? So, I mean, these are some of the comparisons you make. So, of course, being in a corporate, the salary is great. Being a startup, you kind of say, am I going to make my salary next month? The whole different dynamics in terms of being part of a team. So, you know, does your voice matter versus, you know, you're not really being heard? Flexibility versus rigid. With a startup, you can kind of do what you want, but with corporates, you kind of get into this process, you know, meeting after meeting after meeting, right? And more importantly, the impact as an employee. If you're a startup guy, then typically anything you do could turn the company bust, right? But if you do something wrong in a big company, slap on the wrist and the company will still survive, basically. Now, talking about startups, they say that the statistics are that 19 in 20 fail, right? So don't let this be a negative thing for you, because there are some success stories. In 2000, I worked for a small startup called CityKey, which you guys may know eventually was relaunched, a different company completely, but it was basically Foursquare a couple of years later. So it's just one of those things about being too early for the time. I was also involved in another startup that was doing medical references. This company's still alive, so it hasn't really failed, but it still hasn't crossed the chasm, right? So, and I was involved in this company quite heavily for about 5 years. And another company I joined after that was doing things within context awareness and, you know, enterprise architecture. But I actually hit big, right? So luckily in my fourth startup, so they say 19 in 20 fail, and on my fourth, I hit the jackpot, right? So basically, I was at a company called Ubitex that was acquired by Research in Motion, well, you guys pretty know as BlackBerry. And unfortunately, the transition is maybe a little harder than you think, right? So I was definitely more the startup guy, not so much the corporate guy. And what happened with me is that, you know, I got stuck into this, you know, you get into this motion where you're saying, oh, I want to sell my company. You work so hard to sell it. And then you sign the contract and you go, what? I have to stay 2 years? What are you talking about, right? So, and it's like those 2 years of like waiting and waiting and like watching paint dry, right? And of course, moving from the mentality of a startup to the Fortune 500 company was so difficult. But perseverance pays off, right, as they say, right? Talking about companies, intellectual property is always a big issue. I know that Oracle these days is promoting the open environment, and in history it kind of worked out different, because that's a good quote that's from Tim Robertson: to patent or not to patent, right? Just like the old play, right? That's the question, right? So he mentions here, if answered correctly, commercial success beckons, right? Or beckons. So it comes down to two things. I remember when I was first working with some of the early startups, having a patent was important, right? Because I'd be going to these meetings and I'd be meeting publishers, and I had to have something different as the startup trying to license their content. So we had to have like patent pending, right? On the flip side though, from a corporate point of view, it's about protecting ideas, right? And actually saying, we were the first to do it, and if you copy me, I'm going to sue you, right? So I've been involved in 2 patents. Actually, they both have finally been approved. So if you guys want to do this, it's typically a 6-year process. It costs you $10,000, $20,000 to go through the whole process. It's worth it, and it's not worth it, right? So you really have to be careful as to, how you decide how you want to move forward. But I think, it's an interesting concept anyway, so be aware of it. You've got to find the right reasons to patent or not to patent, and of course, being open is a different thing from being closed. So what I want to do with you guys now is talk about the title of the keynote, which is from 1.0 to IoT. And you guys are probably thinking, what the hell is he going to talk about, right? And it's quite simple. Right? Basically, we're here because technology has changed so much. I mean, I'm lucky that I was born in the right era, where when I was a child, I had access to technology that's completely different from today. So we're going to talk about emerging technology, right? And basically, these are technologies that are being perceived as changing the status quo, right? So basically, they're going to make a difference with the future, right? So one of the important releases I look at every year, and I wish I knew this before, because it kind of gives us an indication as to what the market's doing. And I'm guaranteed that one thing you're going to learn from this keynote is in August, you're going to look for this curve, right? So how many of you guys have heard of Gartner before? Right, so a few of you. Basically, they're a big marketing firm, right? They do market research. And this hype cycle of emerging technology is basically this curve they have, and along the curve, depending on where you are, depends on basically what they predict as where the technology is right now. And we'll go through one of the curves at the end of the presentation to talk about kind of the visibility for the future. But what you basically have is on the left-hand side, you have when ideas kind of, like brain farts, technology triggers. Then what happens is everyone gets excited about it, and everyone rushes to say, I'm starting a new company, right? And probably the most notable element on this hype cycle is probably IoT, right? So it started kind of midway up, went straight to the top, still sitting up there even this year. But at some point what happens is companies try things, and some companies fail, some just don't get the concept. So then you fall into this trial of disillusionment, and then big companies get in there and say, okay, let's go and do it right, and then kind of comes back, and then eventually it plateaus, right? So what happens with a plateau is that if the technology is not too niche or too specific, it actually becomes mainstream, right? And what normally happens is that you can have some great concepts, and we'll see it in the future when I go through the next slides, is that unless you have some form of catalyst that actually can complement the technology to actually say, now it's possible to do this, then you could have a great idea, but it's useless, right? So, and there's always a number of factors there, cost or other supporting technology that comes with it. So going back to the beginning, and I don't think anyone in this room, even myself, who's used punch cards? One. All right, there we go. Right, so I mean, it all started back in the day where we had massive computers, right? That was the size of this room. That was basically would add a couple of numbers together, right? It's amazing how things have changed, right? But when I grew up, we had not really computers, but we had like, I remember Game & Watch. You guys remember Donkey Kong, the orange twin screen Donkey Kong? I had a game called Oil Panic. Remember this from my day? And it's basically, these were devices that weren't really running a CPU, but they were running like application-specific logic. And it's actually quite interesting because this was way back in the 80s, but these days, right, they're actually bringing it back, right? So you have Bitcoin miners, and you know, Bitcoin I think is a bit of a fad, right? And everyone thinks there's a lot of hype of that right now, but as I said before, the main interest behind that is going to be blockchain. But we're seeing that kind of technologies come back. When I was young and, you know, bored coming after school, I sunk so many 20-cent coins into these things, right? And I think for me, it's one of those things that actually made me realize, you know, even though I was spending my allowance, I realized I'm going to be a developer, right? So probably the key thing to bring out of this, and sorry, it's a bit of water, is that I remember playing Bubble Bobble. Have you guys played Bubble Bobble? It's probably seen the more famous Puzzle Bobble. But I remember when I used to play two players, one of the first games that had two players at the same time, is that I was playing my high school friend, and we would always try and get the most points. And I realized, even back then at such an early stage, that if I sat in a certain location that I knew the object was going to fall, the logic in the code would always give the points to the player two first, right? So those are things you start picking up, right? In the games like 1942, we realized, you know, oh, you see the pattern, right? So, and there's those type of elements that, you know, I mean, I was only 10 years old, you know, back in these days, right? But I realized then, yes, maybe I'm going to be a programmer of some form. And then we had the early personal computers. Commodore 64 fans here, anywhere? Peek and poke, right? I remember we didn't have, you know, downloads and all these type of things back then. We used to buy a magazine and actually manually enter in codes to get programs running. And you even had cassettes and tapes, stuff like this. I was actually quite lucky. In high school, I was given a microbee from one of my teachers. You know, I didn't really come from the most richest family, but it was actually quite nice because we actually had a computer like group before and after school where initially we played computer games, like most kids do these days. But then at some point we said, you know, there must be more to these computers and these games, and the teacher actually gave us, you know, Z80 assembler programming guides, right? And like, you know, he's probably thinking, what the hell are these guys going to do? These guys are, you know, 13, 14 years old. But surprisingly, after about 2 months, we actually started writing programs, right? And we didn't have the luxury of the beautiful languages these days, being, you know, with virtual machines and so forth. After these, we saw the rise of the desktop, right? So if you were around at this time, you probably remember the old 386, the old 486, the Cirrus Logic, the Pentium floors. We're seeing what happens is, you know, the simplified version of Moore's law says that every 2 years the processing power for computers will double. But what we're seeing now is, you know, we get to a certain point. I mean, my Mac is 10 years old, but it's pretty much the same as the Mac I buy these days. It's just gone from i7 to i5 to i7, right? So it's slowing down. But I mentioned the idea of a catalyst. I mean, the idea of Windows was back in Xerox, you know, in the 1970s. But it wasn't until the introduction of the right CPUs that it became mainstream. Sorry. And so, I mean, people had computers, right? But they weren't using them the way we do now. And what we saw is we've seen the evolution of Windows, right? So I remember running Windows 3.1 and it was booting from MS-DOS, and Windows 95 came out, and then, you know, after that I lost my interest in Windows, full stop. But we do see that, you know, this was an idea that was worked on by Xerox in the 70s, that only now, after the CPU came, it actually made a difference. Next thing to talk about is the internet, right? So how many of you guys used dial-up back in the day, right? Sitting there with 2600 or, you know, 2800 baud, right? So same type of thing. It wasn't until it became affordable that you could actually have internet at home. And these days, you know, everyone has internet in their pocket, right? So I remember working in some companies where we had our own little cubicles, but there was 2 computers near the water cooler that you could use to access email, right? So there's no concept of Googling for answers. You either had to know it or you didn't know it, right? So the internet's evolved quite heavily. We now see a lot of things going to the cloud, and of course serverless technologies, as they'll talk more about later on in the sessions. What we also see back then was the rise of the PDA. Now, you guys pretty all have Androids and iPhones, but how many of you guys recognize half of those logos, right? So originally, Apple did have a device. It was called the Apple Newton, and it was way back in the 90s. But basically, it was a big flop, right? So nothing ever worked, and we had the likes of Palm, which was quite big, but I worked a lot with Palm. We had BlackBerry, we had Symbian, and all these companies kind of went bust. Now, back in those days, we were doing stuff, and if you guys do remember the Palm, and that's one of the reasons why I was in Singapore last time, because I joined a Palm user group. Right, so we did a few games, had a little bit of success, a couple of interesting stories came out of it. But what we had back then was this concept of platform fragmentation. You saw how many devices were there. Some were using C++, some were using C, all the APIs were different, right? Java didn't really exist. It was just still emerging as a technology back then. Right, so, we had to come up with our own solutions, like, building cross-platform development environments. And then we had the age of Apple and Google, right? So this is what you guys all are familiar with these days. And I had an email from a very close friend who said, "Oh, I picked up an iPhone yesterday. It's amazing. In my honest opinion, Palm's in trouble," right? And that was back in, 2007, I think, when the Apple released theirs. Yeah, so in June 2007. What's interesting with Apple is you think now you've heard about the app stores and everything else, but Apple didn't really have a clue what to do, right? It wasn't until March the next year when they actually released an SDK. And more importantly, there was an unofficial SDK released by a hacker before the official SDK. Right? We did have some luck. I had a small gaming company back then, as I mentioned in the first few slides, and we saw overnight millionaires happen. I mean, I remember one of the games from Lima Sky. It was called Doodle Jump. It's just like tap, 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 right? Such a simplest, stupid game, and those guys made millions, right? So I had a bunch of games, and I do know the feeling of getting that #1 spot in the App Store, because one of my games got it in 2009. It was a free game, so of course everyone went nuts downloading it. But with this success, we also got too much publicity. So unfortunately, we got a cease and desist, right? So a little slap on the wrist. It was fun while it lasted, but of course it didn't make us millionaires, but it was, we learned a lot back then moving forward. So what we see now with the mobiles is the whole concept of speech recognition. I mean, back in the 70s, it was just a concept, right? If you guys remember 2001: A Space Odyssey, we had HAL, that didn't exist really. It was all theory. In the 80s, IBM had Tangora. In the 90s, it became kind of practical, right? And in the 2000s, we saw the introduction of artificial neural networks. And what we're seeing now is, how many of you guys use Siri or Google Assistant on a daily basis? Right? You see people talking to their phones, and it talks back. Now, what I found interesting is, I like doing presentations in the last second making changes. So I saw yesterday, or 2 days ago, the news that the Google Duplex, which was the new AI engine for the Google Assistant, apparently beat the Turing test, right? And if you haven't heard of this, definitely look it up. But this was like a conversation that was coming through. So could you guys guess which one was the computer and which one was the person? Right? So it's kind of difficult to figure out. But what happened is that a couple of key points is that it's actually person 2. And what was happening is this AI, this Google Assistant, was sounding so human, it's scary. Right? So they were saying, "Hi, they could do a perfect keynote, throw the ums and ahs everywhere, right? It'd be great. I should have the computer doing the presentation for me." But, it's like they have those pauses, normally if you think of Stephen Hawking, he's like, la, 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 this is completely different, right? And it's scary because you don't know if you're talking to a human anymore or talking to a computer. And I guess the people on the other end have no idea either. Now, it's interesting because there are some people who are really scared of AI, but I think that AI can be used in the right way. And Elon Musk is a bit paranoid, thinking along the lines where he had a quote saying, "Mark my words, AI is more dangerous than nukes, right? And of course, this is not Terminator, not Salvation Day, right? So, you know, don't have to be Sarah Connors in that lifetime. So, I mean, I think it's a valid point though, right? Because we can do a lot with artificial intelligence, we are, but of course using it the right way is probably the key thing. More further developments, as we've seen, is, like you'll see today with some of the demos later on, is blockchain. And it's more than Bitcoin. Bitcoin just made it famous. But the idea is that, you know, traditionally you have like a centralized network where everything's on a single server. And this is about doing peer-to-peer networking, you know, initiating transactions by having smart contracts. The key thing is the distributed ledger, and the kind of the encryption and security comes in for the anti-tampering, right? So the theory is if you have a ledger in multiple places, then, you know, you can beat fraud and stuff like this. And what's interesting is I get an email, and like I said before, news comes in all the time, technology changes. Apparently HSBC and ING actually did a transaction across banks using blockchain technologies. So you'll see later on in the following keynote a good example of this technology in action, and hopefully you guys will start getting an interest in this and forget about Bitcoin. Right? Bitcoin is not about mining or, you know, making money, it's about the technology underlying it. Now, I mentioned before the idea of fragmentation. One of the other things that Oracle has is the Graal VM, and I found this very interesting. I didn't know it before my last code event, so I thought I'd definitely have to mention this for you guys, because I'm sure someone will later on today. It's the idea of, instead of being device fragmentation, you guys are having a nightmare of language fragmentation, right? One of you guys is a Java developer. Your coworker says, no, I want to write C++, right? Graal VM, if you're not aware of it right now, check it out. It allows interoperability of programming languages, and the great thing is you can export it to different environments. So you can export it to Java, you can do it to Node.js, you can export it to Oracle databases, like using stored procedures or MySQL, or more importantly, run it as standalone. They have a great demo on the website. It kind of demonstrates it's not really slowing down your environment. It actually is a quite speedy environment. The technology is quite good. And I guess that's, you know, there's a lot of things happening, and I could talk forever about all these things, and, you know, let the other guys go into all that. But we're kind of here today to say, right, what is this IoT thing, Internet of Things, right? So, I mean, you hear it, everyone's putting IoT on their business cards and everything like this. But the reality is, you know, going to Cambridge, I think it was Cambridge, yeah. You know, the definition is this: objects with computing devices that are able to connect to each other and exchange data over internet. That's pretty much it, right? So some of the marketing experts have said that there's going to be 75 billion devices by 2025. And some of the questions come up, you know, can anything be connected to the internet, right? I mean, the answer is, yeah, why not? Do you want to have your toaster connected to the internet? I mean, maybe, you know, you could have a sensor in your bed that says, well, at least a coffee machine, I do it, at least that one. So when you wake up in the morning, the coffee machine starts brewing, so by the time you get out of bed, your coffee's ready, right? So it all depends on the context of, you know, what do you want to connect something for? But if you think like, even the speaker, what's the benefit of having that connected to the internet? It really depends on what you want. You could actually have a sensor that's monitoring the CO2, right? So it's not about the connected fridges, the connected cars, because these are all verticals within the IoT space themselves. But of course, there's questions that come up, you know, what are the network constraints? How do I get this thing online? How do I communicate, right? And more importantly, how will these devices be powered, right? It's not like we have a 240 volt power point for, you know, everywhere. You guys have trouble trying to charge your phone half the time when you're in a conference like this. You've got to find a power point. So what we see is a lot of devices are battery powered, and good news for you guys today, there's an IoT lab in the developer lounge. Little device like this. I mentioned the Arduino because that's kind of the one I like to play with, and it's really, really cheap. But you can go to the lounge and actually play around. There's an IoT lab, and this is the Wio node that basically is an ESP8266, which is a Wi-Fi based chip. It's about 26 megahertz when I looked up the specs, but it runs JavaScript, and you guys can do a hands-on demo of that thing. But typically, most of these devices, you know, they want to run off like a 3.3 volts or 5 volts, and they're typically powered by a cell battery. By all means, you can put, I mean, Intel had the Intel Edison, which was a, you know, a beautiful IoT device, but if I had an Arduino Uno and an Intel Edison side by side, running off the same power source, the Edison would be dead in a week, right? So this used too much power, right? And basically it all comes down, this is the choice, We see all these devices being put out there, but they're all resource constrained, right? So how do you put stuff on these things, right? You've got to write very low-level languages and mess around with things. But what we're seeing because of this whole cell battery is we're also seeing the concept of energy harvesting, right? So they don't want to have batteries, right? So what we see here, this is kind of a black magic realm right now, but there was a demo I saw where they had a mobile phone that actually was batteryless. It actually could make cell phone calls. It had a small LCD as well. But what we're seeing is that, throwing more power into IoT is not the solution, right? Because we see technologies like this happening all the time, and it's just really saying to me that resource-constrained devices are here to stay. I mentioned standardization, right? This is a nightmare, right? Biggest issue with IoT is it's not about saying, if IoT was just for connected homes, then all the people in connected homes would talk to each other and make up some standards. But what we're seeing is that we're seeing different companies in different fields, like consumer space or technology providers, they're kind of trying to group together and try and make their own standards. We also see IEEE trying to make something. And at some point, Apple and Google said, you know what, guys? I don't care. We got our own SDKs, right? So our own standards. And this is a challenge. We have fragmentation with standardization, and this is really a lack of standardization. In addition to this, right, how many of you guys have IoT devices that have been hacked in some form, right? So there's two famous environments. The Murray botnet took down a couple of US servers back in 2016, I think it was. And that basically because all these devices were just thrown on the market because it was all rushed to market, and there's default passwords, right? So admin password, right? Another example is there was Ivy bug, which affected mainly Axis cameras. There was a bug in the G-SOAP library, right? And what happened is that exploit allowed hackers to execute their own code on these cameras. So all these devices, you're putting got cameras all over the place here, it turned into a weapon of mass destruction, right? Now it brings us to the question of the window of vulnerability. On a PC, it's a different story, right? So your laptop runs, system update, run the update, right? But typically what happens is there's a discovery for a vulnerability, there's disclosure, so some guy says, guess what guys, I found this bug. The vendor typically is notified in advance, so it's not a big shock to the world. And by the time they disclose this information, they normally have a vendor fix of some form. And they roll it out as part of a system update. Now this is fine when it comes to normal computing. You guys all run Windows Update and hated your computer for hours, right, while I sit there trying to download everything. But what happens with IoT is security is the user's problem, right? So let's say, for example, this is an Axis camera, the M1011, and there's a bug. But how many users are going to be smart enough or tech savvy enough to go to their router, look at the DHCP list, get the IP address, and then say, okay, there's an admin console for that. I better change the password for starters as well. But then once they do get in there and they get a file, if it's provided from the vendor, is they actually have to go and upload it and do the upgrade. Right? How many of you guys have done this upgrade process for any of your IoT devices? Probably none of you, right? So I do it because I'm tech savvy. I've got many cameras at home, and there were cameras affected by these bugs, and I went through one by one and updated them. But it's a nightmare, right? And what normally happens is that we see this window of vulnerability, and that's the reality, right? So we have all these devices sitting out there, connected in our homes. We think they're doing the right thing, but who knows if they're being used for some other purpose. And I found a very interesting comic. I wish I could show the whole comic, but I've taken a few funny bits out. There was a comic back a while back called The Internet of Ransomware, right? So not the Internet of Things. So the idea of, your little iRobot, the vacuum cleaner says, why am I hacker $100? Or instead of sucking, I'm going to blow all the crap out, right? So these are things that really could happen, right? Another one there is $20 in my PayPal account, or you're not getting any coffee, you get decaf, right? It's a bit humorous, but this is reality. Another one there is, I'm turning the heat off into your Walmart bank account, And the previous example, which we've already seen, has become a reality, is the cameras and the lights saying, you know what, I'm busy doing something else, I'm going to go do a DDoS attack, right? And that brings us to the next question, liability, right? So, I mean, who's responsible when your IoT devices do something bad, right? So we haven't really seen any definition in the law, and it's probably going to be done on a country by country basis. But the point is, they're going to fall under either negligence, right? So the user's responsible for their own actions. They're going to be just purely liability claims. Or they're going to be some form of breach of warranty where the manufacturer is going to be responsible. And the question is there going to be criminal or civil offenses? Right? So it's kind of a very interesting concept because, you know, you don't drive a car without having some form of liability insurance. But if you hit someone else, then of course you're responsible for those things. But you can freely buy a device from China and put it in your home and say, oh, it works for now, but in a couple of months, oh, it took down the government's website, right? Who's responsible for that? So it's a very interesting thing to ask in that perspective. Now it brings us to what I'm doing these days, right? So I'm doing presentations. Of course, I could do a little plug for myself, right? And I'm working with a startup called Riot Secure, right? So I hope I don't have to do another 20 companies again, right? So I'm hoping I can do another success company, this one. But the idea is, you know, solving this problem of actually saying, you know, how do we manage our IoT devices, right? So we're looking at, you know, deploying devices, we provision them, we monitor them, we update them, which most devices don't do in the first place. But more importantly, it's the notion of taking them offline, right? So you may want to take a device offline, or even for your own purposes, you know, reassign them to something else. So this is what I'm working with. Don't go and copy my ideas by all means. There's plenty of other ideas for you. And if you want some ideas, I'm happy to talk to you about ideas. But you know, this is what I'm working on, and it's kind of like, this is a catalyst of IoT. IoT's been around for 4 or 5 years now, and it's been in the main light, but security is still the concern. That brings us to the topic of, you know, where do we go next? Right, so I used to do 1-hour presentations on security, and I don't think you guys really want to be bored by that. So I mentioned earlier the whole Gartner life cycle. Right, so this is the hype cycle of emerging technology that came out last year. And what you see here, you know, you see in the far left-hand corner, you've got smart dust, right? This is IoT to the next level, right? And it's got a little triangle, which basically is Gartner's way of saying, we'll see that plateau in 10 years, right? In other words, great idea, but it's not going to happen. Not for a long time. We need to get the manufacturing of CPUs way down in terms of size. Right? We're talking nanotechnology here. But what you see here is you can see, you know, you guys are all familiar with virtual reality, right? So as things move along the curve, it becomes more mainstream. So there's an example there of virtual reality. How many of you guys play Pokemon Go? Or played, not anymore. I used to play it a lot, and trust me, there's a lot of debates about me sitting on the phone, walking around cities I've never been to, just to catch a stupid Pokemon. But you see at the bottom there, you see augmented reality. Right? Pokemon Go kind of brought that into the spotlight. But moving up the curve, you see a number of technologies that, you know, of course are being worked on here, and you guys are lucky because, you know, you get exposed to those, such as blockchain. You've got the whole idea of machine learning. You've got autonomous vehicles, right? The connected home, deep learning, virtual assistants, right? The whole chatbot scenario. Then, of course, you've still got IoT platforms, and going back down towards, oh, that's more futuristic stuff, right? There's a lot of things coming on. If you want to get involved in a startup, look at this curve, right? You'll see kind of where you are, but don't be too early, right? Because I was too early in many situations, and I may have got involved in some technology, like, for example, where it said serverless PAS. That's where it was on the curve back in the day. And it wasn't really until technology became the top of the curve that companies were looking and saying, we need to acquire something. Right? Because remember, what happens is people get involved, a lot of hype, then they do a lot of trial and error and fail, and it's only when that slope of enlightenment where bigger companies take over technologies. So if you're looking to get involved in a company or start a new company, get involved around the peak of inflated expectations, but hold off until some other companies fail, so you can be the one being purchased. Right? Don't be too early in that sense. Right? So, I mean, we could go through all these individually, but you can see, you probably recognize a few of the things that I mentioned here. And the good thing is at this event, you will see some of these technologies. Right? They're very early, but they're here to inspire you as well. Now, of course, I talked a lot about my history, and I think we're running a couple minutes late, so it's good I'm a little bit ahead of time, but I think you guys walking away from this keynote hopefully have something that says, perseverance will pay off, right? So the key point is, do what you love, right? You're gonna fail, right? And like the old saying says, fall off your horse, get back on it, right? Because, I was involved in 4 startups, right? And it sucked, right? It sucked when you put all your life and effort into these things and then you go, oh man, that sucked, right? Nothing went nowhere. Or even worse, when you see 5 years later, someone says, oh, there's a new company that ends up making millions, and you go, that was my idea 5 years ago, right? It happens. But the key thing is, don't give up, right? Do your dream, right? Live your dream. Realize there's going to be failures, right? It's going to hurt. But the key thing is, learn from your mistakes, don't be afraid, right? So this quote is probably one of my favorites I've found. And it says, to be a champion, I think you have to see the big picture. It's not about winning or losing, it's about the everyday hard work and thriving on that challenge, right? This is why we're developers, right? It's about embracing the pain you'll experience, and at the end of the race, not being afraid, right? So the key thing is don't be afraid of a challenge, right? Got an idea, strive for it, right? So I think that's kind of my ending point, and from this I'd like to hand on to the next speaker, which you guys are going to see a great demo. I remember seeing this in Shenzhen, and I was like, man, this technology has come a long way. So I think it's Kevin I'm introducing next, so he's going to do the intro. So thank you guys.
A round of applause, please. Thank you so much, Eric.
No worries.
That was a great keynote, very insightful and inspiring at the same time. Great topics around IoT and security and some of the other technologies that are now emerging. Up next, we have a keynote from Kevin Walsh, who's a Senior Vice President at Oracle. He's one of our thought leaders. I think he's essentially our CTO for APAC, if I'm not mistaken. So he's been at Oracle a very long time. He's a great speaker and very insightful about some of these emerging technologies. He's going to talk about 3 more emerging technologies. One is chatbots, second is blockchain, and the third, I think, is serverless. So with that, Kevin, welcome.
There we go. Hello, everybody. Good morning, Singapore. And also, we got to remember we got friends in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. We've got folks in the Philippines watching remotely, and Sri Lanka, everywhere. So I'm really excited to be here today. As Rex said, I've been at Oracle for 30 years, actually, and I've been here in the region for 34 years. So I've seen a lot of change, but I really feel like now is one of the coolest times to be a developer. And I think you guys and ladies are all really lucky because we got some cool technology that you can play with. We got some awesome people that you can talk to. And then later on, we'll even brew some IoT beer that you can drink. So the world is changing, right? And I think that what's been most exciting is, we got lawyers at Oracle, so you can read this statement. Don't make any decisions on what I say. Just have fun. What's happening, though, is that, as developers now, we have a whole bunch of new demands on us because all of a sudden we're flooded with a wealth of opportunities. Clearly, you want to start a company, you can get money to start a startup around here. That's no problem now. It's well accepted. In fact, a few years ago, everybody wanted to just go into banking, right? Because that's where the money was. Now, actually, people are going into startups. And I see another trend as well. When my colleagues ask me about having a developer event here, well, as you know, Oracle has been working with a lot of large corporations and government, and I see it happening there too. Here we have GovTech Incubator. We've got big companies, both banks and non-financial companies, all doing sorts of startup-ish things. There's accelerators all over the place. People who have domain knowledge are now taking these cool new tools and mixing it with the data that's present in those enterprises and really changing everything. And so I love Aaron's talk because I think about this. IoT is one facet of it. It's about now, as a developer, you're no longer just writing a program, you're potentially programming the world. And you have to think that way because to build something great, you got to understand something about the world. But you also have to address some of the challenges because the world is a fairly complex place. So fortunately, we have a whole bunch of new solutions to some of the problems. So people are looking at moving away from dedicated servers to serverless architecture. DevOps, which is the culture that allows you to do what Aaron talked about, cycle time, cycle fast. Basically, you make a mistake, your code's going to have a bug, but you can actually deploy and actually lean forward into deployment so that whatever code you're using, you get it into the user's hand quickly, they can try it, and you can learn from it by instrumenting it using technology like machine learning to understand the user behavior, make your code better, and essentially achieve a goal of velocity, constantly deploying new things. The other things that are out there that are interesting, of course, open source. I mean, we all believe in that, and people are surprised sometimes that an Oracle guy is, but I started that first open source project at Oracle in 1998, and we had no idea how much people would be interested in it. It's not only a technology toolkit, but it's a way of doing things that's really critical. So whatever you do, you have to be able to master those things. And then the new technologies that, the cool tools people are talking about now, like blockchain, to be able to reflect human networks of trust, which in the past would have required intermediaries, can be automated. These cases are going production, and I'll show you a little bit about that. And then chatbots. Chatbots is just one facet of what's happening in AI. Conversational AI for chatbots is really useful, and I'd like to try to show you that in a little bit. So people ask me often, isn't Oracle just a database company? Are we just working on that? Well, no, actually. The database is still important, our relational database, but people are surprised when I tell them we support many databases. We have more than 500 open source packages running on our cloud, and we own one of the most successful open source databases, MySQL, and we're actively investing in that. And the database is important because it stores the information that people have kept and sort of managed like diamonds in a vault somewhere. It's the systems of record that use that. But there's more to it than that. You have to be able to extend that information with other paradigms and other tools. So in addition to focusing on our traditional areas of the database, application, and so forth, we're also investing in a whole range of new technologies. Obviously Java, which we pioneered, the FN project, which is really cool, serverless architecture, things like Jet, which is a JavaScript framework, and of course, our philosophy in terms of moving towards a serverless and a flexible environment using containers, Kubernetes, and eventually serverless functions and microservices. So our platform actually takes into account all of those things. So all the things that you know now and what you have been doing for several years, for example, programming in Java, enterprise Java, and the database technologies are being married up with a whole set of technologies that make it possible for you to develop and deploy new things and essentially innovate using pretty much anything you want, but combining everything together without having to figure out how to make it all work together. So we have a full spectrum. And it's evidence of the fact that we're actually doing new stuff. Aaron, fortunately, he teed up the idea about Graal. This is a really cool new thing that we've launched as an open source project. We have a Graal community, and so Graal is essentially a VM that's language independent. And essentially, you can write your code once and deploy it on Graal VM. It's quite different. What's happening now is people are using polyglot languages to develop things like machine learning workflows and various other things. And it's difficult to be able to integrate this code together because it's relatively inefficient. You have to figure out how to malloc areas and do shared memory, and the compilers are all different, the techniques are different. Essentially what Graal does is it allows you to write your code once and use it on any platform that Graal VM supports. So you can deploy it, as you said, on Hotspot, etc., on Node.js, inside of MySQL. Really cool thing you can do is you can now extend the stored procedures in the relational database beyond just PL/SQL and Java to other languages. Or you can run standalone, and in fact, running standalone, it runs really fast, even Java code. It's already in production in some of our products like OPA and Twitter, probably you've heard of them. They're using it and they're getting tremendous benefits out of it, and many others. How it works essentially is, if you think about virtualization, there's been 3 categories already. We've seen 2 of them. One is hardware level virtualization, so we've seen that for a number of years, and then OS level virtualization, running VMs to be able to extend your hardware. Now we have this platform for language level virtualization. You can mix different code, and essentially the Graal compiler essentially uses an API called Truffle to understand the language semantics and essentially deploy that code on a substrate in such a way that you can mix multiple different programming languages on the same platform. So for example, your Ruby code could run with Python and R, or even native code, C++ or Java. And then essentially when it comes time to deploy, the VM essentially runs on all of these platforms, so you can use it in one of them, or you can deploy it standalone. Really cool stuff. I imagine the best thing to do is go look at the GitHub repository and play with it, or even better, I'll mention one of my colleagues, Cristina Cifuentes, I believe is here. She happens to be hosting the Women in Technology Luncheon, which is also highly recommended. Christina and our team here to talk about Growl this afternoon. Please go talk to her and check it out yourself. You'll really find this interesting. So that was not the topic, though, that I most wanted to focus on. What I wanted to talk about is I want to give you an example of what's happening in terms of how chatbots are combining with AI and blockchain to give you an example of kind of a new way of thinking about developing applications. So for this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a scenario that I want to sell my car. So I saw Larry Ellison bought one of these Lexus LFAs a couple of years ago, and essentially it's about a $450,000 car. He parked it in front of Oracle, and I was jealous, so I went and bought one. But the problem for me is I wasn't being very practical, because anybody who knows me knows that I travel about 90% of the time, and I never really got around to driving the car. So I've decided also that after the LFA was fun to drive, I'm going to go ahead and sell it. So there's one sitting over there. If anybody wants to buy it, come see me. But I'm going to post it here on the blockchain. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a demo of, instead of posting in the normal way, I'm going to interact with a car selling service that essentially is running on a blockchain. So let me explain how that's going to work. So my colleague Dylan will be up here in a second. I'll talk about the first part of it, where I'm going to go into a chatbot and list my car, and then it's going to be posted on a blockchain using a serverless function. And then essentially Dylan's going to take the process of how do we develop the serverless function and what does the blockchain look like. What we're going to use is we're going to use the Oracle Mobile Cloud Service, which all of you can try out whenever you feel like it. It's on the developer site. You can build your own chatbot. It uses AI to essentially do natural language processing and a few other things. Integrates with our blockchain cloud service, which is essentially a managed hyperledger, and eventually FN. We're using FN, essentially serverless functions, to call that. So if all goes well, I'll be able to show you this architecture, which is how the screen's going to sleep up here. How the application actually works. So once again, here's me selling my car. I'm going to tell the chatbot that I want to sell it. There's going to be some things happening, for example, like an OCR on the back end of the images and so forth. Post it on the blockchain, and eventually it's going to transfer ownership to the dealership. So this is an example, this pattern I'll get to in a second, is an example of the fact that this is the kind of workflow that people are thinking about now, instead of building specific apps. So if you look at your iPhone, you've probably got about 50 apps on there, but most of the time you spend your time in your chatbot app, like your chat app. So WhatsApp, you're in WeChat, Facebook Messenger, whatever your preferred chat religion is. But essentially, the problem is, as you develop apps, it gets harder and harder to get the end user's attention. So you need to think about how can you expose the app functionality as an API, and then use the chat environment as essentially the client for you to be able to get to the users. In fact, now, everybody thinks that over the next couple of years, a lot of the apps that came out in the first generation are going to kind of go away, because the typical user doesn't use them. It'll be cloud-backed, it'll be mobile-first, and it'll be conversational. And I think the work that Google is doing and others, is interesting to see that that conversation is going to become very human-like. So the diversity of the challenges for us as developers is we have to be able to harness AI and other things without having to learn how it works. We have to be able to take our existing code and deploy it in this new world. And also there's different interfaces, there's different channels, there's a complexity in terms of integration, security, and all those things that we've worked on. And then of course the AI has to work well enough that it's going to be useful. So you don't want to probably build your own natural language processing module. It'd be better to go and leverage someone else's. So we'll show you how we do that. So with that, I'm going to switch over to the PC here. And then I will run the bot here. So bear with me a second. So here's Facebook Messenger. It's probably a little hard to see. I mean, we ran this before, but first thing I'm going to do is wake up the bot. So what I did is, oh, by the way, Bob's Car Dealership. I friended this bot, and so I'm going to say hello, if I can type. Okay, and the bot will wake up here in a second. Hello, bot. This is real, so everybody's saying, Kevin, you're not really going to do this. Yeah. So okay, here we go. I'm logged in Amit's to Dylan's account, but it says, are you interested in buying or selling a car today? So I'm going to say buying a car. Oops, sorry. I was wrong with that. I didn't want to do that. Actually, I said I want to sell my car. Sorry, I'm already thinking ahead. Let's see. Bear with me. You can tell this is real because Kevin screws up the flow, right? Sorry. Hello, bot. Okay, wait a second. See, I'm going out of sequence here. Bear with me. Hello. Caesar, what time? 4 p.m. Okay, I'm going to go with this. But basically, the bot. I started this dialogue with the bot, and essentially what it does is it takes the language I type in and it maps it to a function. So I'm not sure why I got. Let me try again. Hello, bot. I want to get back to the beginning. Okay, here we go. Now I'm going to sell my car. Okay, so I want to say, let's sell my car. Okay, you can give me the license plate number. So the license plate number of my car should be here. 6 London India King 274. Okay, so what it's going to do is going to make a call out to check the car to make sure that first off that it's not stolen or anything like that. Thank you. Can you upload some pictures? Well, I don't have any pictures, so I'm just going to say no. Say wait a minute. Okay, so yeah, good, cool. So it looked up my LFA. They're parked at Oracle in front of the 500 building. It says okay, registration number. It's got the VIN. So what it did is it made a call to a web service to go look up the license plate and get the basic information of the car and some other details. So as you can see, it'll basically confirm all the information, address, etc. Is this correct? Yes. What's the mileage? Well, I really didn't drive it very much. It has 4,000 miles on it so far. And those are really fast miles if you've seen the LFA. Blue Book price, $375K. Cool. Okay. We'll buy it for you at $385. Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's a good deal. I'll say yes. It says, great, we'll start the process and transfer the document. So what's happening behind this, I'll show you in a minute. But essentially, we're triggering functions to list the car on the blockchain and essentially check, for example, we called an external web service. The service can do some OCR, for example, look up the license plate in the picture and so on. So as you can see, the bot essentially, could switch back to the slides. The bot essentially allows us to be able to trigger the interaction. Rather than having a fixed interaction that's defined within an app, I can make it a lot more flexible. And the platform itself uses conversational AI. And what this is it allows you to have a conversation using human language with the back-end service. There's native integration in there for the various chat clients like Facebook Messenger, Slack, WeChat, etc. So you don't have to build that yourself. And also we can integrate with services like Alexa, various Google services, or pretty much anything that has a webhook. There's a whole series behind this of algorithms, and the algorithms we provide out of the box allow you to do essentially the contextual language processing and also take information about the context like the endpoint, the user context, or any other data that you might have loaded into the chat stream. And although we provide some algorithms to start with, you can extend those. We use essentially deep learning techniques to do the image processing and other machine learning approaches to NLP. So let me show you how I built the bot. Can we switch back to the laptop for a second, please? So here we got some bots. This is the mobile cloud service, and so there's a car dealer bot cell you can see. So I'm going to click on that. this is our UI. It's pretty easy. It's pretty intuitive to use. So it's a fairly low-code environment, but it can be extended with your code. So what we have here is we've got some intents. For example, buy car, sell car, greetings that the bot might interact with. And then below that, the bot itself processes fragments of speech, which we call utterances. And so you can see this has been loaded, trained with a few utterances, like do you purchase cars, sell my car, sell car, etc. If I go in here and I can do this, and I can actually determine from the bot itself the intent. So here I'm bringing up the bot testing interface. I'm going to say, I have a car to sell. What happens is the language then tries to guess what it is. In this case, that hasn't been trained, so I'm going to say, no, that's not right. It's not buy car. I want to add an example. So I'm going to take this example, and I'm going to add it to my utterances. And what will happen next is, you notice this thing went a little exclamation, it says training required, because now I just added a set of utterances to the model. So I'm going to select the model, basically. In this case, it's using a machine learning-based model, and I'm going to click train. So actually, that's taking that example, putting it back into the corpus and retraining the bot. While it's happening, let me show you a couple of other features. It'll take a couple of minutes. The other elements, the way this works is, actually this is a state engine. And so once it determines the intent, basically you create a state flow that causes the bot's dialogue to take place step by step. We provide like the standard kind of, entities, but so it's already trained here. I'll show you in a second how it works. So you notice it comes back, it says it's trained using a new model. So that's fine, but before we do that, I'm going to add an entity. So suppose I want to add an entity like, for example, dealership, car dealership. I can simply add that, just call it car dealership. And then entities contain values. So for example, in this case, a value relevant to a car dealership would be the name. And I can have synonyms of like Bob's dealer, etc. And so once I do that, as you see, this dealership entity now can be processed by the bot flow. There's a few other functions here as well. So for example, you can look at the YAML that's been generated for the flow itself and modify it. We can also add resource bundles. Sorry, let me close this, you can see a little better. Resource bundles are essentially new language bundles. So if you have domain-specific languages that you want to add to it, you can extend it yourself with that. And then, of course, there's other services. So for example, this one doesn't use any custom services, but I could add other custom services which are reachable by a web call. And then the other cool thing about this is that it's channel independent. So this particular bot was a Facebook app, but I could run that bot on a number of other channels. So we've got a couple examples here on Facebook, but you could build a channel for some webhook, for example, that calls out to any service that you want, any chat service. So it's very open and flexible, and it works really well. Surprisingly, people are surprised at how useful it is. And this is, you notice, with very little programming. So let me go back to the intent of sell car again, and then of course if I say if I want to reset this here, I'll test the intent. I have a car to sell. Now you see 71%, really good recall on that, because obviously I programmed it in. But what if I say I have a Lexus to sell? Wow, see, it is not programmed in. That statement's not programmed in there. So the machine learning can identify my intent as the same. Or I could also say I have a car to sell to a dealership, or I could say I have a car to sell to Bob's dealership. So the ML is really smart in terms of processing the utterances. And it's flexible enough that you can build really useful applications easily. So with that, can we switch back to the slides for a second? And the other thing that we've done is we extended the enterprise cloud localization. So here, for example, one of the things my team in China built that's really useful is Baidu Maps. We've integrated a lot of local web services because, this is a global internet. You have to be able to support any service that the users want. So we at Oracle are going to make it easy for you as a developer by providing those APIs essentially prepackaged. When you use our mobile cloud service, if you want to use one of these popular ones, and we have dozens, and continually adding more, we'll continue to do this for you. Therefore, you don't have to build the interfaces to whatever comes along. Because as you know, these things come and go as fashion, and there are also groups of people who use specific functions. The thing that made this whole process possible, though, is that our forward-leaning API-centric design was what made us think about how we would build an app differently. So, you know, we essentially use technologies like our apiary to design and publish APIs and separate that problem from the actual code itself that runs the logic. We can then link that with, you know, a chatbot very easily. We can also use the platform itself to deploy these things as microservices, and in a minute, Dylan will come and show you that. So, you know, really, this is a new paradigm. The new paradigm, in order to do that, you have to have a platform that supports multi-channel. So we have a channel configurator configured for basically everything that has an API in the chatbot world, in the chat world. We also use declarative flow. So you're not actually having to hard code the flows. The flows are actually pretty powerful, and they can work with extensions, and they understand the scope of the dialogue itself. Behind that is our AI platform, and our AI platform, we're continually advancing it. So we're going to provide you with tools out of the box that you can use even if you're not an AI expert. But if you are, or you have access to a large data science team and you want to build your own algorithms, you can plug them in. Essentially, the other thing that we do is these things tend to work not only with open sources on the internet and web APIs, but they also need to work behind the firewall against the on-premise system. So we're providing the integration back to any of our enterprise cloud systems or Oracle on-premise systems through SOA gateways, et cetera. So, you know, this is really a quite different approach to building the bot to make it useful. So I've kind of covered number one, and then my pal Dylan is going to come up for a few minutes and take you through step number two, building the serverless function. So Dylan, and actually the deployment to the blockchain. I'll be back in a few minutes. I hope you found that interesting. Dylan, here you are.
Thanks.
Thank you. Grab my bottom.
All right. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be talking about function, and essentially it's about a architecture that's event-driven, right? So the idea is that today there's monolith of code. So you have a lot of programs that are written with thousands of lines of code, a lot of logic written there. It gets really complicated. A lot of people want to be able to really fail fast, right? And you want to be able to iterate quickly. So function is a project. It's open source, Oracle. And there's a lot of commits to this project. You actually go to GitHub now and see that and so forth. So a lot of commits, there's a lot of followers, a lot of contributors and so forth. It's active. So what I'm going to be talking about today and actually demoing very quickly, shortly, is part of the process in this end-to-end scenario that we have, right, from buying and selling a car. So function, really, what we're going to be doing is processing that in between, right? So the idea is we want to be able to fire a few different types of functions that will actually be doing background checks and determining the nature of if there's a blacklist behind some of these cars and things like that. So there's basically an input function. And it's reading an input function. It actually is outputting standard output, and then any of the errors and so forth are logged to your standard error log messages and so forth for debugging purposes. So the function really it's kind of like you think about the API gateway. Everything else, the piping and so forth, is all you've abstracted all the important parts and then left all the other parts that are not necessary and so forth. So the code is wrapped kind of like in a container environment. So you're actually running Docker over here. So when it's deployed, you'd actually see a Docker instance and so forth. Right, so it's a key part. So there's also a flow mechanism. So over here, you will actually see an orchestration of different types. It's actually consuming different types of functions. So you can actually have like long-running scalable functions. So if you think about two different notions of synchronous and asynchronous, so it actually supports both. So event-driven architecture is relevant to that. So Java supported. And you can actually interact with it using different types of programming languages and so forth, like Node.js, Python, and so forth. A lot of developers are over here want to start using things like Go, Golang, and so forth. So it's a simple chat bot. We're actually selling the car, the function, and in between there we are doing a lot of invocations and so forth. So a lot of these functions are basically doing checking your car facts report behind the scenes. So at the same time we are looking at things like your criminal lookup, right? Have you been a criminal? Have you committed a lot of tickets and so forth? There might be information about you in a central intelligence agency. Also some international blacklists that you could be part of and so forth, right? So all those can be then orchestrated in a sequence, right? And then accordingly, if you want to go through that the code segment, you can actually look at the flow, how it's really instantiated, and you start looking at how the request, right? Over here, we're actually doing get car requests and so forth. And then we start looking at processing and invoking the function that you'd actually see shortly as well. And then after that, when you do like more criminal lookups behind the scenes, you can generate all different types of functions at one particular time and so forth, and order it as a sequence as part of the orchestration. Obviously, then accept it, and then the flow is done and things like that. You will see actually a visual flow of things going on around there. So I'm just going to transition over here to my demo for function. Okay, so here it goes. Terminal screen. Okay, so this is like pair programming, right? So probably need some assistance from you guys as well, so just keep it interactive and things like that, right? So what I'm going to be doing first is actually initializing the function runtime, right? So it's just going to be a hello world program that we saw earlier. So you can see that the boilerplate is created. There's a YAML, which is kind of like a configuration and so forth, and you'll actually shortly see that and things like that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and deploy it now. It's actually called my app, right, for the demo perspective. And I'm going to be doing it local over here. So, okay, so what did I do wrong there? So, let's look. Okay, that looks about right. Could not find function file. Okay, let me just go back, look at. Okay, let me have a look at this. Oh, you're right. So what I got to do is actually go into the folder, right? So obviously, right. So basically, I had to go into a folder and then actually invoke the deploy function and so forth. So it's bumped up to the version. And so now what I'm going to be doing is basically calling the function call, right? So if you wanted to actually follow along, you could actually run it alongside what I'm doing over here from the function GitHub website. And there'll be labs on this shortly thereafter as well. So we look at a function call for my app. And you can see that it actually processes, it sends like a hello world message and so forth, right? So you want to be able to look at some of the routes that are actually defined, some of the endpoints and so forth. You could actually list them, right? And it'll actually show you that. So here you got a couple of different endpoints. So one of the things to consider over here is that, of course, once you're deploying a lot of this, you want to be able to also have security built in. So you could secure a lot of these endpoints with things like the API cloud platform services and also the identity cloud services and things like that, right? So that's an important point. So you can also do a curl, and you want to be able to basically do an HTTP and have it run on a particular browser, for example. Same thing. So what happens over here is you can actually basically go to that particular localhost website, and you'll actually see it's running over there, right? So even after I refresh it. So you want to be able to also do a test, right, to see that some of the unit tests and how things are going behind the scenes. And basically it'll give you an idea on step 1, 2, and how things actually went. And over here, you can clearly see that the tests actually ran. So it's not like a full-fledged unit test, but nevertheless, it gives you a perspective on what was passed and so forth. One of the other things you want to be able to do over here is you also want to be able to look at the flow, right? How's that orchestration spawning off different types of events in a sequence, right? So let me just actually run that. So here's where the deployment is for the function flow. And I'm actually just going to run the flow that we talked about earlier and attempt to catch it here so that we're able to see the visual. So you can see that it's actually showing how the O code, get cars is generated and so forth, and it's spawning off different types of, background checks that we talked about, right? So processing a car and also looking at criminal lookups and so forth. So at any given point of time, if I want to be able to drill down to each one of these and look at what are the sum of the stages, and actually you can see what were the creation trigger points and things like that, so processing the car and so forth, like the Lexus over here that Kevin actually talked about. So this could actually help in both in terms of debugging and so forth. Nowadays, it's really important if you're looking at things like real-time debugging that you're doing and writing code and all that. So it actually helps you to be able to go ahead and do things like that. So that's the part of the function and also the function flow. So now I'm going to be transitioning back to the slides to actually to go back and actually share and discuss with you how is the transaction now being handled in the blockchain network itself, right? So obviously we have a blockchain cloud service, which we're going to be talking about shortly. So here, the important part is that we have a private permission blockchain, right? So the notion of trust and verification is very important, right? It's all broken when it comes to security and so forth. So how do we actually do that? So blockchain, going back to the Wikipedia, right? So the idea is that it's immutable, right? So once it's actually published in a block, it's all verifiable, right? At the same time, it's distributed, unlike the fact that it's centralized in a database. So here's a distributed ledger, near real time. So different types of parties can be, endorsing different parts of the ledger that could be operating in different nodes and so forth. And you can have multiple parties really communicating with each other, right? And the notion of the middleman and so forth, obviously that goes away. So that's an important part. Now, what else were we looking at when we think about blockchain? So a lot of use cases. So things like fraud and privacy and so forth, securing documents like PDF and all that. In fact, there was I think one of the startups, it's part of the, it's going to be over here as well. But how they're actually using blockchain to secure PDFs and then actually publishing and sharing it across the world, because there's a lot of vulnerabilities that we see in a lot of these documents and so forth. Also, when we look at things like healthcare, in Singapore, we've seen a lot of one healthcare sort of initiatives and so forth. So how do we move next stages and so forth to be able to secure some of these electronic health records and transactions and so forth? Supply chains, right? So you're going to have like a maritime industry, and you have different types of people communicating and so forth. And you want to know that a specific part at a particular time is actually an original part that is being shipped, and that's all you need to know. So you don't need to know the cost of the part. You just need to know, really, is that original? So that can actually be published and shared as part of the blockchain and so forth as well. So public sector, obviously, a lot of use cases. Financial services, as Aaron mentioned, I think it was one of the first trade finance in the world that actually happened. That's amazing, right? So, soybeans across between Argentina and Malaysia. I mean, who would have thought, right? So that's something it's here. It's happened, and a bank has actually used it. So these are viable alternatives to the current deployments and so forth. So blockchain, lots of areas of interest. So the Oracle Blockchain Cloud Service really is built on a couple of different types of services. It's a managed platform as a service. So you can have this node, this concept of nodes that are actually interacting with each other. So there's a ledger, and that ledger would be deployed on these different nodes. There could be remote endpoints and so forth. Smart contract, where the chain code is basically deployed, and you would actually see an example of the chain code. And then there will be an ordering service that can actually order and put all these different types of nodes in sequence and so forth. And then there's a membership service as well, right? Who are the founding members? So there's no central authority, but then there's a founding member, right? And then everybody else kind of in there. There's a REST proxy. So there's a kind of like a gRPC. This blockchain is actually built on a hyperledger and so forth, so it's open in that sense, right? So you actually interact with this blockchain using a REST proxy, and you actually see, how is that one of those peers published over there as well. And then finally, all this can be managed through a centralized blockchain admin console, right? And that way, from a developer standpoint, you can start interacting with this using application REST APIs, SDK-based technologies, and so forth as well, right? So on that note, it's important because, as developers, when you're looking at a chatbot and then you're processing it through your serverless function and so forth, and then invoking the blockchain, a lot of these the pink dots basically is where your chain code is deployed, right? And you'll see an example of that. And then you can see the visuals over there and how the dealership over here, which is Detroit Auto, right, one of the founding members and so forth, how is that actually managing the different parts of the transactions that are being endorsed and so forth. So here I'm going to transition quickly to keep the momentum going, right, in terms of demonstrations and things like that, so that you get an understanding of what we are actually doing behind the scenes. So now, let's go to the specific area over here. So these are some of the cars. Obviously, I have a custom application deployed in here, and you got details of that. And so we looked at some of the cars, and let's pick on one of the license plates and so forth. And we want to be able to query that license plate. I'm just taking an example over here. So over here, you will see that essentially all the API details from showing what were some of the transactions actually happening on the bottom right-hand side. You will see, how it was transferred from one dealership to another, and I'll actually show you an example of that. So so this is like an application deployed, on the Hyperledger, and you are actually querying and getting information about those vehicles and so forth. So now, let me attempt to do a transfer over here, right? So I'm going to log in as Bob's dealership. Okay, so I want to do a transfer of a particular car from one dealership to another, right? And there are two dealerships over here. So you have Bob's dealership, and then you have John's dealership. So I'm going to do it to John's dealership, if I get the spelling right. So this should show me if the transfer is successful and so forth. So it is. So now let me go back and trace that and see, query that and have a look at how it was published on the ledger and so forth. So it actually shows you that chain of verifiability so that you're able to really look at that sequence of events that really occurred, right? So here you see that I've done a series of, check in, check out, what I mean by transferring, cars between two different dealerships. So all that are actually recorded over there. And also, the entire information is actually shown and published on the chain code as well. So now let's go back to actually see what is how the whole blockchain cloud service is really managed from a single management dashboard and so forth, right? So over here, you kind of see the whole blockchain summary. So there's a concept of 3 organizations over here, and then you also have 2 peers that are connected. And on top of that, you have these 4 channels. Now you look at the Detroit channel, the dealership channels and so forth, and then also the chain code and so forth. So last month over here, we can actually see what was actually failed, what were some of the endorsed transactions and so forth, and some of the details that come as part of that. So looking at the network, we start looking at a visual display of what were the different ones. So the green ones over here are all the peers, right? So these are actually deployed, remote facilities. A lot of the ledgers are deployed on that. So these are all the organizations, the ones in blue. So over here, the one in the green is actually a certificate authority, right? And this is actually the order is part of the membership chain over there as well. So you can actually look over here, and so here there's a founding member. At the same time, you start looking at, so Detroit founding member, then John's and Bob's dealership accordingly, and so forth as well. So you can add more organizations and obviously, change the ordering settings and things like that as well, right? So once you look at the peers, and you can see that these are the protocols I talked about, right? So there's gRPC, so you can actually natively in Hyperledger, communicate across using that protocol. But over here, one of the things is that the custom applications are actually communicating via the REST proxy, right? So here's the notion of the REST proxy and the gateway that we talked about and so forth. So again, if you wanted to look at this particular display over here, so both public and private is supported, right? So you can have a public channel that, for example, you have all the different types of dealers communicating on that particular channel. And you could have like a private channel that's specific to only a particular 2 different types of, say, for example, communication between the peer and then also the backend. So you can have a mix of both. And that's the key thing here. It's not just public, also a private permission blockchain would be supported in this type of deployment and so forth. Now, on top of that, you want to be able to go in and actually look at some of these channels, right? So what are these channels? And inside each one of these channels, what were some of the blocks and the transaction actually going on and so forth? So you actually look at the ledger summary, and you can actually go down and actually look at the details of what really happened in terms of the transaction IDs and the chain code and so forth. So over here, we're using version 1 that's deployed, and you'll actually see what happens behind the scenes as well. So here is the instantiated code. Let me just show you an example of what an install chain code actually looks like, right? So here is how the chain code is basically, if you need to install it, you can actually upload it and so forth, and you can run directly from here, and then you can actually select a set of targeted peers and things like that, right? So after that, if you want to be able to then instantiate that code, you can go back to your chain codes, select your chain code, look at instantiated code, and then you can instantiate the code. So once you instantiate the code over here, you can actually select the type of endorsement policy, right? So within the endorsement policy, you can actually add the identity of the different types of members over there. And you can actually select, basic and advanced, regular expressions, and things like that. So if you wanted to go there and basically look and see, what was really happening behind the scenes from the chain code itself. So here's the dealer chain code. So you actually see the structure and definition of the vehicle and so forth. And also you see, what was imported for debugging purposes and so forth. And also other information, what was some of the semantics behind the scenes when it looks at, if the vehicle existed and things like that and so forth, right? So of course, you can also look at other elements of your function definitions and all that as well in here. So that's pretty much, as it comes down to going back to the slides and switching back to the slides. So that's an example of, how the blockchain basically, works. And, you've seen basically now function flow, and blockchain. And I'm going to actually hand it back to Kevin to bring it home.
That was a cool demo. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
So you get to see not only what the demo looks like, but what's inside. I think that's really the cool part. And so what you saw really, we went from the chatbot. You can see that with serverless functions, we can easily deploy applications quickly, and we can actually iterate. Dylan didn't show you all the scaffolding and so forth, but you can install FN on your laptop, play with it, and then you can deploy against any target that you want, on-prem or on cloud. It's really a cool technology. It'll allow you to be able to build complex applications fast. And, so looking at these things as well, what we're trying to do is, I hope you can see that what we're trying to do is give you as developers the best tools you can have so that you don't have to waste time gluing bits of stuff together. And instead, you can focus on actually the solution. Like you can take your idea, turn it into code, and deploy it quickly. So quickly, you can build a function, you can build a chatbot, and you don't have to, for example, on a blockchain, figure out how to deploy a blockchain, manage it, and so forth. And the idea is to allow you to make the cost of trying something new very low, and then if you want to change it, you can immediately change it. So the cost of failing is going really low, too. The platform itself is fully integrated as well into a full suite of, CI/CD tool set that's really DevOps native, container native, which we think is the future in terms of how people are going to deploy these systems. It's very efficient. It uses cloud native technologies, of course, on our cloud, state-of-the-art cloud, but you can use some of those technologies on your on-prem as well. We're supporting mobile, as you can see, using a chatbot instead of having to force you to design an app which has a limited life cycle and very little attention. And potentially, what I showed you today was just so simple. I didn't have time to really show you many of the other use cases. My advice is go on and try it. You'll be surprised at how much you can do with it immediately. The API-first development models are sort of our philosophy because we believe that in order to program the world, you have to be able to talk to APIs, and you have to be able to do that in an enterprise-class manner with the same security and the same governance that you would have for any other enterprise app. So all of a sudden, this lightweight technology has taken a big jump forward. Of course, we support Java, but I hope you can see through things like projects like the Growl project and other things, we're going to support polyglot languages. We do support that today. We just didn't have time to show you everything. So, ideally, what we're trying to offer to people is, to developers, essentially, is really a state-of-the-art, complete cloud-native platform that's going to change the way you build applications. The front-end tooling is there, and some of these things you're familiar with, like Oracle developers using Apex can write code here. You can use Jet for JavaScript, visual tools like I showed you, apiary to design interfaces, and I really advise you take a look at the apiary.io or the apiary cloud service on Oracle. Really cool stuff. Nobody's got anything like that. The back-end services deployable on containers as enterprise Java, as functions, as mobile. essentially on a platform of common services. So the common services platform means that no matter what your programming approach is, what your language is, or your skill level, you can make use of these very complex features without having to build them yourself out of single components. We support things like a complete CI/CD development environment, DevOps pipeline, and developer cloud service. Kind of start there. That's where you should look. The container cloud for deployment. We have log management. We have event management using Kafka as a service. API using Apiary. And as you can see, the blockchain cloud service makes it simple to set up a really enterprise-class blockchain or to do anything with blockchain. Identity management and various other tools like the AI that we showed you earlier. We only showed you a tiny bit of the iceberg. The way you learn is by collaborating. And so this is a great event, essentially, for us to get together. So I definitely advise you to go to the meetup sessions this afternoon and get some hands-on, and then to take this back into your own world and do that. We have some other events I'll talk about in a minute. And of course, when it comes to deployment, of course we support Oracle, but we support everything. So you can deploy against whatever platform you want, and you can integrate data against whatever you want. And essentially, we want to give you the platform that's going to allow you to run a state-of-the-art infrastructure on which you can start programming the world. Really, that's kind of where it's going. We're seeing tremendous takeover of this. In fact, the developer momentum is just, we can't do enough of these events because as soon as we do one, there's so much interest from that we want to try to actually work with you as individuals. So 14,000 customers on the platform itself, already 3,000 apps in the marketplace is generating revenue, and essentially for us, we're developing the services. But really where it's at is for the developer community. And yeah, it is developer.oracle.com, not co.m. But you should take a look at this site. This is kind of the launching pad where you should start your journey to kind of go to the next level as a developer. But we also have events. So here in Singapore, we're doing meetups on a monthly basis, and we intend to extend that out to the region. If not physically, we'll do it virtually. We've done some in various countries in ASEAN, and my intent is for you to be able to tap into that $6 billion that Oracle spends every year on trying to build the best cloud, the best development environment, and be at the state of the art, or try to push the level of the state of the art. We do not follow, we try to lead, but we lead with our users. And we really need your input on these things, and we look forward to working with you. So I'd like to thank you all for joining this event today. I'll pass it back to Rex to wrap up. He's got some interesting goodies for you, as you would expect at a conference like this. And thanks for your attention and interest.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Sure.
A big round of applause for Kevin and Dylan, and also Aaron, Ardiri, and Churian as well. Thank you so much. I just have a few more public service announcements to quickly go through, and then we'll release you to a break. And then, of course, the breakouts and the real code sessions begin after that. So, first of all, for those of you interested in competing, we have an interesting competition outside in the Code Lounge called the Zip Labs competition. You can compete, get hands-on with some of these services, try out 6 or 7 different things, and if you complete them quickly enough, offer you some small token prizes. So please join us for Zip Labs outside. Secondly, at lunchtime, we're hosting a Women in Technologies lunch. We like to promote diversity and inclusion. We have a number of very strong panelists today. This is open to everyone, by the way, whether you're a man or a woman, okay? So please come and attend and listen to some of these great folks from the community, and also Christina from Oracle. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. Thank you so much for coming and helping us out. And then a couple of product bits, product use. So I don't know if you guys heard this. A couple weeks ago, we announced that Java 10 is now generally available. Check it out. You already heard about Graal a couple times, but you can get your hands on it by going to GitHub and downloading it right now. MySQL 8, how many of you use MySQL? This is also GA now. It was a release candidate earlier, so just a couple weeks ago, this went GA. Download it and play around with it. And we have a MySQL cloud service too. For those of you who are sort of rapid developers or citizen developers, we have a visual development tool called Visual Builder Cloud Service. You can sort of drag and drop. And you can also do hardcore programming if you'd like as well. This is one of our first autonomous services, and this went GA about 2 weeks ago. So check it out. It's a cloud service also available as part of the trial. This is an interesting one. Managed Kubernetes, as well as a registry service, just became available last week. So check it out if you're interested in Docker containers and using Kubernetes for orchestration. I know a number of you here are here to learn, right? You're here to learn about technologies, not hear about Oracle products. So if you're interested in doing that, Oracle University is a great source of information. They offer some free training and also some paid training as well, get some certification. We already promoted the developer portal, so check it out. This is a great place for technical content. The agenda, as I said, you'll see it up on some big screens outside. It's also on your mobile phone if you download the Oracle Events app and search for Code Singapore. You'll get a download and you'll see the complete agenda for the rest of today. And then last but not least, we want to offer you a chance to get your hands dirty with Oracle Cloud. We're offering you a free $500 US credit. Our normal trial is only $300, so this is a little bit more, $500, I think it's, what, 670 Singaporean dollars, something like that. So when you sign up, you'll see a conversion to the local currency. So use this URL to get your $500. You'll also get an email after this event with the specifics about this to give you another chance to do that. And this is what you'll be using if you're going to be out there in our hands-on labs or the Zip Labs competition. So again, I wanted to thank you all for coming to this event. Hope you have got a lot of value out of it and that you'll get more value out of the breakouts for the rest of today. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.